we have it for other classes. So those of you who can join me on the call and who are seeing the recordings after class, make sure that you email me at the end of the day saying, I've watched the recording, if you have any questions, so that I can mark your attendance, regardless if you're on the call or not, right? The most important thing is that you get the information. How you get that information is, unfortunately, all up to you. So how's that going? Inui, how are you? Inuo, I'm sorry. You should tell me how I'm pronouncing your name and if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and correct
Yeah.
me if I'm not.
Yeah, he's right.
Everything okay? Are you in the dorms in Salem State or are you somewhere else?
No, I'm in my apartment.
Okay. Is it in Salem?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, good. All right. So we will begin in a couple of minutes. How are all your other classes going? How's the Zoom education working out for you? Yes or no?
It can be really, really tiring looking at a screen all day.
It's horrendous.
Yeah,
It's
I'm exhausted.
awful. It is exhausting. So do you put in your schedule to change it up? I mean, if you want to, you can have your feet up, you can have your laptop on the ground, change it up for yourself. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be sitting in a chair all day, right? Like if you need to be standing, stand up. If you have a yoga ball or something to like stretch out, it's okay, right? Especially
I've been using a kitchen chair this whole time, but I finally got an office chair at a yard sale. It was $10, but it was really nice, except the armrests keep falling off. So
listen,
don't use it until you get the armrest. You need the full experience. And I'm like, I just want a comfy chair.
Listen, I think our bodies are not made for sitting. They're not, okay? Squatting is better. If you can squat, your spine is going to be more elongated. Remember how we saw that scribe in the Egyptian scriptures, right? Did you see his sitting posture? Cross-legged and like super great spine support, right? Like he was sitting down the whole time, but he was sitting not on a chair. So just understand and be aware that this is it can really mess you up in the long run in terms of your back support, or you need to adjust immediately, right? Like you can there's these liftable things that you can have for your screen. Do whatever it takes for you to obviously be healthy, because this is not an ideal time. So I change up between a stool and cross-legged position to squatting, to change it. You don't have to be stuck in rigid and thinking that you need to sit on your bed or whatever, especially if you're sitting on something soft. Your back will go. Like you guys are young, but this may have effects on you down the road. Speaking of that, for all of you who are taking courses, reconsider what and who you're doing it for, right? Understand no one is going to give you an education. No one gives out information and you suddenly absorb it. Like that's not how education works. It absolutely comes from within you. It comes from your interest and your participation. If you are not fully engaged in what you're doing, it's not the right thing for you. And that's not a bad thing. That's not like, I'm not telling you to drop out of school. At the same time, consider what it's for and what's it going to give you. All of you at the core have what you want to be doing. It's in you. You had it when you were 3. You're sitting with it now, okay? You should be doing that thing, whatever that is. It could be dance. It could be, go to dad. It could be anything that you knew you loved when you were 3, okay? So consider what that is again, because education does not work. We need all of you, and especially in these times, we need all of you to be following your passion as closely as you can, whether someone discouraged you for doing it. If we had someone know how to grow plants well, if we know someone how to take resources and turn them into food, if you know how to, I don't know, if you know how to clean a toilet really, really well, you will know how to paint. I guarantee it, okay? If you can clean that toilet till it's spot clean. We need all of that, right? And whatever you are good at, we need in society. So stop thinking that you need to be a lawyer or a doctor like your parents wanted you to be, okay? Be very clear about, if you are into car maintenance, you better get yourself to a mechanic to teach you right now. And YouTube right now is going to flourish with everything that you will ever want to know, okay? So gain momentum in thinking that you're not stuck in these classes. Make these classes either work for you, and if they don't, it's okay. I will not take it personally. You can drop the class and get to a class that really, really you feel strongly about. It's time now. You can't waste your time on frivolous things. You need to do what you're meant to do on this planet, and you need to do that as soon as humanly possible. Is that clear to everybody before we start our Egyptian? Okay. Any questions? Okay, I hope that you're present. I hope that you're here with me, and I hope that you're excited to learn from the Egyptians as much as I was, because it's phenomenal. We still have some of their little tidbits from leftover. Okay, sharing screen, looking at the slides now, and then we're going to, by the end of the week, you're again going to have a quiz. Make sure you keep that in mind. I think it's now on a Friday, but if you want me to push it to Saturday, I don't care either way, because I'll do the grading after next week. So those, would you, how many of you just put your hands up or thumbs up, whatever, for having it on Saturday? How many would you like to push it forward to Friday? Okay, Saturday it is. Saturday it goes. Okay, here we go. Boom. Okay, so we are in Egypt, and now we're in the New Kingdom. So again, Egypt was ruled for 3,000 years, right? Super long time. They did have these in-between middle periods, but we are in the New Kingdom, which is after a transition. Syria has invaded, the Hyksos from Mesopotamia and Syria have taken, and they came down and invaded in this middle time epic between the New Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. At the end of that in-between era, the New Kingdom begins with the Egyptians driving out the Hyksos using new battle technologies, including chariots and compound bows. Egypt would grow to its greatest extent in this new period. And in this new period, the ruler at the time was called Hatshepsut, okay? And she was in fact a woman pharaoh, which is unheard of because pharaoh, there was no word in Egyptian for queen. There was only king, right? There were lots of women who, in the positions of perhaps the wife as well as the mother of the pharaoh, that were highly, highly influential. And there were many of them that came close to being considered kings or having kingship. However, until Hatshepsut, there wasn't someone that really took it to the extent. She ruled for 20 years, and she ruled in the biggest flourishment of Egyptian culture and started the new kingdom. Okay, it was at her beginning of her reign that the new kingdom really started to flourish. So let's question who this female pharaoh was. This was her temple. It was really different. It's a very different kind of temple. Look at the landscape, look at where it was placed. So give me anything that you see about this architecture that's now embedded within the landscape, quite literally like carved into the stone of this land, okay? This was her mortuary temple. So give me anything that you see. What do you see, and how is it different from previous temples for pharaohs?
It's a lot flatter.
Right? You have this kind of like, it's a lower kind of stepping. There is still a stepping stone up, like different layers up. But it's at a different, it's the opposite. You have pharaohs building temples up from the ground to the pinnacle of the sky. And here you have a pharaoh that's embedded the temple within the landscape, in sort of the crevice of the landscape. It's really dramatic with the landscape in the background. You have the nature that's sort of surrounding you, and the stone then contrasts in terms of geometry to this natural land behind it. It's really fascinating. You have the reverse. You have someone digging into the ground to create a temple rather than building up, right? So imagine that kind of shift. Instead of going up horizontally, going up into the heavens, you're now digging in and really rooting in sort of the earth. And whether you could call it the feminine, whatever, but it's a choice, right? It's a stylistic choice, unlike any other that we've seen in terms of temples. And then you have this kind of facade. This is the mortuary temple again, as you're walking up, that kind of geometry. And you have these sculptures that line the Osiris columns that are lining. Osiris was the main god of Egypt, although they celebrated many gods, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is Osiris as you walk up to the temple. You have the geometry lining it. And then this also precedes, think about the Parthenon and think about the sculptures that are used to reinforce the architecture, right? The gods and goddesses that hold literally the temple up. You have these sculptures that are lining the columns, kind of lifting up this kind of architecture, okay? So Hatshepsut herself, there was no male heir to the throne. The previous pharaoh didn't have any male heirs, and she knew from an early age that she kind of was going to be trained and take this on. She did have she married someone that was supposed to be the pharaoh, but he got sickly and died and whatever early on. So she knew that she was training for being the pharaoh, for being the king for at least 15 years. She was taking on, and her father, the pharaoh, also knew that she had this kind of innate role that she prophesized. Actually, she was so close. You know, if the pharaohs are basically seen as embodiment of the god, right? And she projected this kind of theory and propaganda about herself, that there was a calling, that there was a myth about her being born and her being female and becoming the pharaoh. So now in this sculpture, she takes on elements that she sees from previous kingdoms, right? Like she sees, and the pharaohs have, obviously the Egyptian art hasn't changed, so she just borrows those elements. And she makes that hundreds and thousands of replicas of herself, right? So she knows the power within art to immortalize herself and project that onward. So here you see her sitting inside, wearing the pharaoh's sort of crown with the cobra coming at the front, as well as the beard over here. You also see her, and she's stylized in the same way that the Egyptian pharaohs were. Her shoulders are forward, her shoulders are quite broad, her breasts are smaller, right? They were taken in, they're more masculine, and at the same time, in the back, there's a symbol for femininity. So we know that besides the features, we know this is Hatshepsut. She lined these sculptures back in the temple. As you saw the processions going up, she had this kneeling offering pose, which is different. So for pharaohs, usually they're standing, and she certainly had a lot of sculptures of herself, not only standing, but also in the Sphinx pose, okay? And they would line up ahead of the tomb. Now this tomb is where Osiris's sculpture would have been taken across from the Nile and into the temple, and the god would literally pass in between her. And this sculpture, especially the kneeling one, was as an offering to the god that was passing in front of her, right? But also it was embodying herself as the god, okay? This position is not easy. It's not good on the knees. You can only do it momentarily, especially thinking about now sitting in your chairs, how uncomfortable that is. When you kneel, you don't do so for a long time, but for her to make, she made about 8 to 10 of these sculptures. And in this position, in this kneeling position, and I just lost the train of thought. And this is, this immortalizes her in this position for eternity, right? So this kind of offering gesture, but at the same time embodying really the gods at this point, right? So she created this artwork, she created these sculptures for herself, she created these myths for herself, and then she would send out her people to go and spread the word about her reign. And actually that was a period of great stability of 20 years during her reign. So she was quite a force. So look at her slide specifically in her work, right? And think about the contrast between previous pharaohs and her. By the way, just like in politics, 20 years after her death, the pharaoh wanted to erase her from history, but because she made so many artifacts, he couldn't possibly break them all. So you have her actually erased from hieroglyphs. You have half of trying to like carve out and chisel out kind of like we do continuously, right? Like we erase somebody's history to think that they didn't exist or didn't flourish. So so there was, after her death, there was that kind of contrast too. We are back looking at the details of this tomb. This was the tomb of the scribe Nebamun, whatever. And this was the scene that we saw from the beginning about his hunt, right? But what's interesting about this tomb, he was a scribe. So scribes, again, were very high up in the chain of hierarchy in Egypt. They were, they could read, they could obviously write, they were the scribes, but they held a high position. So right underneath the pharaoh, and you can see that because obviously not everybody had the money to afford themselves a painted tomb. But really, this, if you were to think about the point or the purpose of this tomb, it was a small room that was carved into the stone. Then there was a layer of plaster that went on, and then it was lined with some sort of lime, that white plaster that goes on the very top until the mural is painted and embedded. The pigment is embedded into the plaster itself and letting that dry. That's why it is so well preserved. But it's almost like the most detailed, the artisanship that went into this tomb. And I'm sorry that you're seeing only this section of it again, because there were more than 4 or 5 walls that were lined with stories and animals and banquets, and really showing the way that Nebamun was enjoying his life, that he was one of the wealthy folks. There was a scene of feast that was painted in there. So look at the other details that you see. But just from looking on the detail on the right, look at the craftsmanship and the way that things were painted. So this is 1,400. We looked at the 40,000-year-old wall paintings. So think about how different or similar those cave paintings were to this, right? It's almost like the Sistine Chapel of the Egyptian times, right? Look at the way that the precise line, but not only that, you get the repetition of the animals, the feathers, whatever the texture of the animal was. You see the cat here on the right? That texture, the feathers, the repetition of that, the details of that, right? There's tiny little details that mark the pattern of each of these feathers or whatever plants that they have. It's really not only a feat in sort of telling the story about Nebamun's life, but it's also this really gorgeous way of displaying the skills and the connection to nature, actually, because you can see how the artist had to know. There was a herd of geese that they painted on one of the walls. It's just exquisite. It's an incredible rendition and skill of the artist that is now developed in Egypt. There's monarch butterflies. Look at the top over here, how this is painted. So think about how it would be painted into wet clay, and also the colors that they're using. This is now a much broader range of colors than certainly cave paintings, okay? Because it's including blues, including greens. Have a look. What do you see? What kind of and there's of course hieroglyphs and telling the story of the life of Nebamun. Thoughts about the patterning, thoughts about the painting. Any of you that are painters or drawers, think about how that is done. We know that from Egyptian times that things were copied onto the walls, so they had a very specific style. Obviously, you can still see the squared shoulders, the hips, the position of Nebamun is as it's been in Egyptian culture for a very, very long time, right? At least 1,000 to 1,500 years before. But the animals and the details, look at the legs of this bird right here, right? That kind of detail is striking. It's outstanding. It's incredible. Talk to me about what you see. And I think there's another slide. So look at the detail of this.
It's clearly something that they put a lot of time and effort into, that like they cared a lot about like going into the afterlife.
Yes, there's something about the story. Obviously, they're not decorating their houses, right? Where cave paintings, perhaps it was also about connection to the spiritual, but perhaps it was also a space of living. Yeah, this is specifically most of the art that is created in Egyptian times is devoted for no one seeing it. So imagine that. Imagine that you have this tremendous skill. Obviously, Nebum commissioned this, right? So you get paid for this work, but the shame of it that no one's ever going to see it. Can you imagine? And can you imagine? So you have an understanding that you're not doing it for another human being. You're actually painting for the gods. So think about that. If you were to paint for gods, what would you paint? What would you represent? What would you show them? What would you and how would you do it? What would the skill be, right? Would you take your time to do that bird in this kind of detail where the brown dots, I mean, this is a timed commitment. It's really beautifully done, right? If you want to devote yourself for an eternity to something, this might be it.
Even in the background, sorry,
Yeah,
even in the background where it's, you know, you're so focused on the main people, the pharaoh and all the birds and cat and everything, but in the background on the walls where they have the hieroglyphs, and I'm not sure, I don't remember if those paintings that are in the columns are also hieroglyphs, or I can't remember the word for them, but even those are so detailed
yes,
and
yes.
made with purpose.
Right. There is no difference in Egyptians when they're between writing and art, right? The writing and the art are intertwined. The symbols are actually pictorial, right? And the skill, and that's why the scribe is not only the writer, but they're also the artist, right? And this is the tomb for one of the artists, one of the writers. So imagine that too. Like he would get the best painters to be like, I'm going to die. I want that. I want the best painters to go and decorate this really exquisite tomb. And I'm sorry that this is only one shard of it that they got at the Egyptian at the British Museum, but there's like 4 or 5 other walls that also have the most exquisite painting. This is now a practice because Egyptians have had this tradition for such a long time. This is now refined to such detail, really extraordinary detail, especially if you look at the naturalistic world that they're depicting between the butterflies and the birds and the different birds and the cat. And there's a fish scene, there's a geese scene again. So those kinds of details are exceptional. I mean, that kind of drawing did not come into being until much later on in the West as art develops. All right, so we're going to take a jump, unless anyone else wants to brag about the tomb. Any other thoughts?
I just
Okay.
really like the texture in the cat's fur and the bird's feathers. It's really amazing.
And think about that, the plaster, when it dries, it's solidified. So you have to work in a relatively quick way to get this thing transferred over. Obviously, you're doing lots of drafts before you go onto the wall, but once it's on the wall, it needs to stay, right? It's embedded, the ink is embedded within the plaster of the wall. So imagine if you were painting your room, and while the paint was drying, you need to quickly, all of you should draw your wall. Draw the images and symbols that, yeah, don't tell your parents, but yeah, decorate your walls in the most amazing, yeah. Let's start. Let's put this into practice. It's really important. We're switching now to Akhenaten. Again, the tomb was not for a pharaoh, just to be clear, it's for the scribe. Okay, so just know that it was a smaller room, and it was just decorated. It didn't have all the things that the pharaohs have, but it was it was up there for sure. Akhenaten changed, and the next pharaoh in Egypt changed the seat of the pharaoh and moved it up. Usually it was in Thebes, right? In Thebes they had the tombs. Up here he changed the seat of where he was going to have his kingdom. And he also changed not only his name, but he changed into this idea. Egypt was a multi-god belief system. Okay, they believed in different gods for different reasons, similar to then what the Greeks would start believing in. Akhenaten changed that and said one god. There's only Aten, which is the sun god, right? And he would go and praise only the sun god, but he also changed his name to Akhenaten, which is something like praised by Aten, praised by the gods. So he's a direct link. It's almost like Jesus from God, right? Like he's the direct line descending from the king. And this is the kind, and art changes, philosophy changes, and again, this idea of many gods now drawn to one God. And this is the kind of art that you see in, and I'm going to try to move this again so that you can get a good look at this black clay setting. Sorry. I'm just trying to move this. There. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so you have the slate of Akhenaten here from 1350, with him as well as Nefertiti, who was his queen, right? And we know from Egyptian times that obviously the ruling happened before this. It was Hatshepsut, so she would have the female role obviously was a strong influence. But Akhenaten is shown here in a very different way. So let's talk about those differences. You have Akhenaten sitting here on the left, holding his eldest daughter over here. But look at the way that he's holding her, right? He's supporting her underneath his, he's really a dad in this image. You have him supporting the weight of her at the bottom, resting her head inside his hand, and then actually giving her a kiss. How sweet. He's giving her a kiss over here. So it's very much a role of sort of the father, but in a very gentle, very different way. Not only that, and then you have Nefertiti over here with his other two daughters on the right. You have the sun god represented here as this, the orb over here, and there would have been, where this kind of belly button looking thing is, there would have been a serpent here, okay? So one god, and then you would have these rays that were extended from the god Aten, and the Ong sign. This was eternal. You have the rays extending, and they have somewhat like rays of hands kind of pointing out. But you have at the where it comes to the nose of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, you have the Ong sign representing eternal life. Okay, so this image really represents their direct link to the sun god, right? That they're the chosen ones. But it's also in a completely different style from what we have seen in Egyptian art. Egyptian art is you standing, you have your shoulders forward, and you've had that again for almost 2,000 years now in depictions of art. How is this different? Look at the bodies, the way that they've drawn. Look at all the details. What do you see? This is different, like anything we've seen. Lucian, go for it.
Oh, sorry, my mic got unmuted.
It's all right.
I was just gonna talk about how the babies don't look like babies; they just look like tiny people.
Right. And for a long time, artists really drawing babies or representing babies, they looked at the baby body and they said, "Ooh, it looks like a little version of a person." They didn't really look at the body and look at the form and try to register how a body actually is. They just saw them as little people. And therefore in art, and this continues actually through the medieval ages, no one knew how to draw babies until like you get to the Renaissance. You draw little people. You see these really ugly looking babies because people didn't know how to represent. They just took a man and shrank his proportions. So that's one thing, but how are the people defined now? In what ways? Because they're very different. For a while, people thought that maybe Akhenaten had, and I think Nefertiti, there was always this kind of incestual where they would have half brothers that would marry and produce offspring. But so they thought that maybe he had a deformity, but it wasn't that. Akhenaten decided on this new style very purposefully. He wanted to start a very different kind of kingdom, and therefore he needed very different kind of representation. You see this slouching body. You see him not very formal. I mean, they're really lounging and in this kind of family setting. They're not these kind of really standing forceful things. You can see their pudgy bellies. By the way, the rolls on the stomach were actually meant to be as healthy. The more pudge you had, the more resources you have, the more regal you were. So now you're depicting Nefertiti. You have the bellies showing, right? It's kind of a awe-inspiring thing to have the kings and the queens with their belly fat out. But that was the style that he wanted to project, okay? You also see, again, it's like much more of a family scene of them enjoying the children, the family and the ruling, obviously with with Aten having the rays extended to Nefertiti, there was a balance of power. There was a balance, it looks like, a family life, which is something we can still learn, especially today. Okay, any questions on this slab? Any difference? And of
It's not
course,
really a question.
okay, go for it.
They just look like what I would imagine an alien looks like. Like they're
Right.
just so elongated, and their crowns and hats are just it. It just makes it look like an alien to me. I'm just like, are we
Yes.
sure we were working with people? And I know we were, but it's just
No, you're right. I mean, there's
amazing.
this, yes, it is. And this, so you have to think about if it's a stylistic difference. If Akhenaten had some sort of deformities at the time, they don't think so, but that was the initial question with this. And then, of course, in Ancient Aliens, you will get to this heralding to, yes, they have these crowns. Are they crowns in Egyptian times, or are they really, right? And then you look at the babies, you have the elongated skulls. When the babies are born, if they're from a natural birth, you have an elongated skull. So if you've ever seen a
Yes.
natural birth, you have these really large craniums in the back. This large, I don't know, right? And again, are they representing really the babies, or are they stylizing the babies? We think it was a style.
Was a really long natural birth, and they just kind of got stuck there. Like,
Right. But even the older one, she's not a newborn anymore. Anyway.
No.
Wasn't there a tribe
Yes.
created skulls specifically for beauty?
Right. That's the other thing that you were thinking about, that maybe it was the softer that the baby is, the more you can mold the skull, and you can kind of elongate the skull as it goes, and of course it was a sign, it still is a sign of beauty. So there might be some of that happening as well. But we don't really know is the answer. But certainly it's a completely different style from what
not naturalistic, you could say.
Right. All right, so we are moving on to Tutankhamun. So Tutankhamun's tomb was actually in it moved back after Akhenaten. It moved back to Thebes, and they moved to having multiple gods again. The Akhenaten era was done, and Tutankhamun took over, possibly being one of the sons of Nefertiti, which we didn't see a son in that tomb. We saw 3 daughters. But Tutankhamun possibly rejected his father and rejected his father's philosophy, as teenagers should do, and decided to bring the center back down to Thebes, right? And he started a very different kind of rule, although he was very young when he died. This tomb was found in the in the tombs of the kings, but it was actually found in the last year when the guy who was excavating needed to get new money, and he only got extended for 1 more year to dig, and it's in this year that he found the most heralded treasures of Egypt. So he got down the stairs, this is the stairway, and he called the person who was financially supporting him to come and actually dig out the cave together. So you walked into the room, you would have the stairway. I'm going to try to again move so that you can see, but you'll be able to see this in the slides. You're coming in here, you're going to work backwards. You're going to go through a long corridor, and this is how they excavated it. You go to the 2nd floor doorway, and then you come to the antechamber of the tomb. You have the annex back here. You had to break through this wall to be able to actually get into the burial chamber, which was back up here. And then you would get to the treasury. So the treasury would be, again, most of the focus in Egypt was on the afterlife. So you started building your tomb from the time that you were young, and you would perhaps there would be offerings that would be brought to the pharaoh during his lifetime to then bring with him to the afterlife. And you have the treasury would hold, the riches and the gold and things like that. But Tutankhamun's tomb is the most exceptional one that has ever been excavated, right? His actual sarcophagus, he had 3 sarcophagi that were embedded in one another. the last of which is solid gold. Gold was associated with being a god. Okay, so in the transition of the afterlife, you yourself become the god as you die, and you can see that because it was the lining, the gold that it was embedded in, but you also have lapis lazuli, which was supposed to be, your hair was meant to be blue if you were a god. So you imagine God being gold and blue hair. It's really interesting if you think about, if you're going into the direction of ancient alien theory, think about if you're contrasted with light, if you're backlit, right, and you have you're hovering in gold, and then the darkest sections of you, black is going to be, your blue is going to be the closest thing to black that you see. Okay, especially if you're backlit. So look at somebody who's in a bright light, possibly coming from the skies and the heavens. Anyway. But it's these two colors that are associated with gods, okay? And of course, once this was found, there was a layer of soot over it. They also poured a couple of buckets of resin on top, perhaps a tint, so that it would be there for eternity. Of course, being the excavators that we are and the colonists that we are, that didn't take, and we stole the mummy. Okay. So this is the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun from 1323. He died at the age extremely young, perhaps hit in a chariot battle, or and his death was very quick. So they had to put together these riches in a really fast time to put and actually move his body. His body was moved, I believe, from his death site to the king of to the Valley of the Kings. And they had to quickly make this mask. And there was a question about the death mask. Was it, in fact, done for him, or was it meant for a different pharaoh? But at this point, we think that it was done for Tutankhamun himself, although he was about 18. So imagine the fast pace of how this was made out of 2 sheets of gold. It was the realism of this is really unbelievable. You have lapis lazuli inlaid. There was a question, there is a crack in the back of this mask, which he was actually wearing. Once they took the sarcophagus and took the top off, you got his death mask. So not only can you imagine uncovering this tomb, finding this kind of unveiling where you have the 3 sarcophaguses inlaid, you have the last one in gold, which you're obviously very, very excited about, but then you open the tomb, and this is one of the only mummies that has this death mask, which represents, and the riches obviously found within. You're excited as a colonial archaeologist because you know that fame and fortune are coming your way. But think about the way that this was done for the intended purpose that it was for, right? Think about it again, transforming Tutankhamun into a god, right? That was the main reason for this mask to cover his face during the afterlife, was really to transform. And all these treasures and all these riches, again, were not for the earthly realm. They were not meant for us. They were meant for the next stage. Any thoughts and questions? Certainly, you can see Egypt's huge trade routes with this death mask. You see the various stones that are inlaid into the gold. Yeah, if you were to find this mask, what would you say? You'd be very happy. My son wants to be a hunter for treasure. This is one of the examples that we looked at together. What do you see? You can talk about it from the technical point of view to the philosophy behind it. You can think about, from the Egyptian philosophy, this served obviously a very different purpose. We see wealth and riches. They saw transformation, right? And the difference between those ideas, right? That this is either a material thing, or just like in the way that other cultures have dealt with objects, this is a way to pass through, right? To literally become a god. Thoughts?
the gold, it's like ethereal, like glowing. Like I think in like Shrek when Fiona's turning into an ogre or something after they get married, she like the sun like bursts through her, and that kind of makes me think of that.
Definitely the light is something. Gold was meant as again, this idea that it was, yeah, it's a reflective metal. It's a precious stone, but at the same time, it's a, you're right, it illuminates and shines out rather than absorbs the light. And that's something that's very interesting. It's emanating from that, right? Imagine opening the sarcophagus and getting a dead mummy, a dead body. But at the head of that, you have this, right?
I would be petrified. Like if I were to find this, not because it's like scary or scary looking, I would just like, obviously if I were looking for treasure, I'd be like extremely happy. However, I don't think I would be able to touch it. Like I'd be scared. It's so beautiful and intricate and just lifelike. I
There's
just,
yeah.
I wouldn't. I'd ruin it. Like I'd think in my head, I'm gonna ruin this.
And
So I
then and
can't
think about,
touch it.
yeah, I think there's so much power that is in relation to the tombs and the Egyptian culture and that story that it holds, and the idea of the afterlife and how different that is from our culture. Thinking about that, really, life begins when you die, right? For an eternal life, and one needs to get ready for that. That kind of philosophy and that kind of, we've ripped it apart, right? We've ripped it to shreds because we have now decimated those tombs, taken out all the treasures that were not meant for us. So there's this real conflict. Yes, it's absolutely stunning piece of art, right? The craftsmanship, the way that it was done, but and we have a lot to learn from it. At the same time, it's not for us. Not so what do we do? Do we take this artifact, record it maybe digitally and return it to the rightful owner? Because you're right, there's something about power and something about returning this to the origins that it was meant to be in.
I mean, it's just like unbelievably disrespectful, you know?
Yeah.
This is like a man's tomb. And it's like digging up a grave times 10 because he was viewed as a god. It's just unbelievable.
I feel like
There's definitely yeah, go ahead, Eve. Sorry.
I mean, just the look of it too, like how I would be scared to touch it. Like, I think that was also not the purpose, but it's meant to look so godly and ethereal, and it's just, wouldn't you know, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't take this. Like, this looks like it's something that I probably don't have the capacity to handle, let alone should take with me.
But these are tomb excavators and they live for this,
right?
Right?
They don't think like that, but it's just like, isn't there like a little voice in your head being like, hey, don't touch that?
Or maybe like laws of the people that these come from, right? The roots. We've taken it out of its context, guys, right? Like this is a shell now. It was meant to be on top of a body for that body to pass through to be the god. We have now taken it out. It's now a shell, and it's placed in a museum for us to gawk at. Yes, because it's a historically incredible artifact. And of course, taking it out of its context so somehow takes the power away, and the philosophy of what it was done for is absolutely turned on its head. And we need to be careful now to reinstate and reinitiate the content and the philosophy by which this stood, right? This stood for something. We need to make sure that perhaps we find that context again, reconsider or reevaluate what we're living for. I want to, and at the end, I want to read you a passage from People's History. Hold on one sec. All right, but let's make our way to the last artifact, which is the papyrus in the Book of the Dead from 1300 to 1290. This was again placed in the tomb with not a pharaoh, but a scribe. Okay, so again, this shows the scribe at a really high level. He's right underneath the pharaohs. And this scribe again is using both his tools. Papyrus, by the way, of course, is a technology that shifts everything. You now don't need a slab to write on. They made the papyrus out of leaves from the fertile lands of the Nile. And now you can have books really for the first time, or letters, or these kind of embedding between the art as well as the text, right? You have that kind of visual representation. So over here on the top, you see the scribe over here. Hunefer was his name. His name somewhere appears on I don't know which hieroglyph, but Hunefer's over here, and he's now telling all the gods of Egypt about his life to see if he lived an ethical life. It's very much like the idea of Christianity but it's not like going to heaven and hell. Only ethical folks were allowed to even consider having an afterlife. And so he's here talking about to the gods, talking about his ethical life to see if they would grant him eternal life. And again, the eternal life is the symbol for it is the Ang that you have over here, that the top row of the gods have over here, and then you have the Ang over here again. When you continue the story, so you have him telling the story up here, then it continues with him going into the final judgment with a few other gods. So he's being led over here. I forget the god with the head of the wolf. But he now tips the scale. So he looks to see if over here in this bottle is the heart of Hunefer, and it's weighed against the feather. And if the feather is another representation over here of the woman, of a god that's on the actual scale, the balance of judgment. The feather is now heavier than the heart, so he is okay to go in and continue his walk to the afterlife. You have the Osiris is the main god, or the top god, if you recall, is Osiris, and he's entombed over here inside this little temple. Okay, and that's really where he enters afterlife. You see here he's depicted with the lotus flower, which we know from Nile has been a symbol throughout paintings in Egyptian art. But again, this kind of scroll, even though it's from the 1300s, it would have been recognizable to people even 1,000 to 2,000 years before that in Egypt, because the style is now back. This is not Akhenaten's version. This is very much in the traditional Egyptian style. You also have the white now. I think there was this kind of plank over here that supported. The sides of the Nile would get actually salt that they would use to mummify their mummies with. And the white represents the salt, because it was such a big part of the afterlife tradition to cover the bodies with salt to take out all the moisture. And that salt was excavated from the edges of the Nile when it would overflow, and you would get a layer of sand as the water would evaporate. So you have the next character over here is another god that's now writing down the judgment, and it's this very clear direction that Hunefer is now had an ethical life and is proceeding into the afterlife. So all seems well in the papyrus that he is in fact getting the afterlife. Of course, he's writing this during his lifetime, right? And taking it with him to the tomb. It's very sweet. It's like a projection that he's had an ethical life and he's meant to go and continue on with the afterlife. And these the mummies would be, all the guts and everything would be taken out and put in separate containers that would be represent one of the gods that would protect, for example, the heart, or they would protect the brain, or they would protect the intestines for the end of eternity. They were put into these urns, the insides of the body. Super interesting in thinking about how, so this is the last of the slide. Let me see if there's any more details, right? So this is the detail. The worst part about this is trying to move these little things out of our way. Or whatever. Okay, you have the judgment here, you have the scale here. Again, in this little urn would be the heart. The feather is heavier, it's lower, and he basically passed the test. And here you have the detail of Osiris now meeting Hunefer, and going on to the eternal life. And all these symbols, this is the same, the eagle-eyed god, forgot his name, I think he's the son of Osiris. And he's represented again here by the eye and the feather. The ostrich feather is meant to be as a symbol for, yes, he's accomplished it, he's going to the afterlife. Okay, I want to talk about the difference now between our philosophy with the dead, especially given today's times, right? And the processions we have, and the ideas, and the funeral, and what actually happens to the body, how we conceive of, it being over and done with, right? Someone dies, they're dead, right? And how that structures the way that we live. That idea, that philosophy, that things don't continue, right? We think with our life ending, things end. Of course they don't end, right? The rest of the world is continuing on, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. Things are changing, right? But there's now there's now something immaterial that is left over, right? Which we now all have to super quickly claim. What do you think? How is your life ruled by how you view death? Do you see the correlation? Like, if you think you're dead and done, you live a particular way. You take as much as you can, as quickly as you can. You hoard everything to try to give to the next, maybe your offspring, right?
That's true.
Or for yourself. Alex, go for it. Sorry.
Level of fear that comes with it. That's a little bit unnerving, I guess.
Right. There's a fear of the unknown. We have no idea, right? So this idea that there's an unknown, there's a void. We don't know how to enter. Obviously, no one has crossed over, perhaps, right? So there's that huge fear, and that's there. And so do we live in the shadow of fear? We don't want to die, right? So we try to avoid running into death. That makes sense.
I mean, I think,
yeah, it's a pleasant thing,
Right. Yeah,
I think that there's a fear more so of death now, partially because we have this fabricated separation from death that previously, like, families would prepare the bodies for a burial. They would clean them and dress them, and we had this greater connection with what happens after death, even with just the body. And
well, now even when people are old, we ship them to Florida, right?
Exactly. Like, it's
I mean, how many elders do you have in your community, and do you have friends, or do you have some close friends that are of different ages, right? I mean, that's valid. You have to think about, they are, in fact, I mean, I know we don't like to think about it, but we're here ultimately, folks. We are fertilizer. We really are, right? Except for this brief moment that we exist. So what do we do in this state? Because we can't afford to be doing what we have done. And this idea that we are unconnected to our death. Egyptians were preparing from the time you were born. You were building that death temple. You saw it rising. You knew that was where you were going to go, right? And you sort of prepared. You did everything for that. That was your end goal. We don't do that. That's not our focus, right? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Either way, right? There's not a right or wrong answer. I think in our culture, we try to avoid it as much as possible. By the way, Eva, I love your dog.
Thank you.
Avoiding it, though, makes us live in a particular way that has driven us closer to it, in fact, right? Like the extinction for human species is on the horizon. We're clear about that. Certainly folks on the West Coast have experienced quite close up, right, what it means to come close to apocalypse or whatever that. So I'm going to read quickly 2 philosophies from People's History of the United States, looking at the chapter. And if you haven't read this book, this is quite an important text to think about. There's a in People's History of the United States, you have various perspectives that Howard Zinn really researched into thinking about what perspectives from different journals and different articles that he pulled from was from the first encounters point of view. So he's looking at from the journal of Christopher Columbus, for example, okay? Let me turn off, sorry about the noise in the background, that's gonna stop. How many of you have heard or read from People's History? Okay, so all of you, if you're living in the US, please pick up this book. There's a free PDF version of it. Okay, I want you to look at these two strands of thought, okay? So this is from Columbus. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged from the glass beaks and hawksbills. They, meaning the Native Americans, willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, and this is from Columbus's point of view, they were well built, very judgmental, with bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword, and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we can subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. So think about that perspective. And then think about the different philosophy in the idea of willingly trading everything you owned, okay? And then I wanted to read you one other passage. You can look from, if you want to read about Native American differences between female and male genders, this is a good passage to read on page 17. But I want to read to you this idea. So they lived in large, meaning Native Americans, large communal bell-shaped buildings housing up to 600 people at a time, made of very strong wood roofed and palm leaves. They prized birds' feathers, berries, colors, beads made of fishbone, green and white stones with which they adorned their ears and lips. But they put no value on gold or other precious things. They lack all manner of commerce, neither buying nor selling, and rely exclusively on natural environment for maintenance. They are extremely generous with their possessions, and by the same token covet the possessions of their friends and expect the same degree of liberality. If the US continued with this mindset, right? This idea of living exclusively on natural environment and for our maintenance, we would have a completely different platform. We would have a completely different way of being. So if we didn't take the colonial perspective, and some of you, if you want to question and reconsider the philosophies, it's important to read. We've had different philosophies in the past. We've had matriarchal cultures. Look at them, research them. The education is now in your hands. You have to claim it. No one's going to claim it for you. There isn't really a teacher to teach you things. You have, if you find interest in something, by all means, won't you just go to that text and really commit to it, right? A lot of the times we kind of like, because it's school, we don't want to engage. But it's not left to anyone but you. If you have strong beliefs about being a female or gender neutral or anything, you have to stand up for those ideas. You have to live by those codes, right? If you have a belief system, it doesn't matter that you say, right, yeah, I'm an environmentalist, I want to live ethically on this planet. You can say it all you want. Unless you practice that philosophy, it doesn't matter. You're contributing to the other thing, right? So think about these roots, think about in history where these philosophies may be intertwined, and start deciding and really living and standing up for what you, forget standing up for, live by them, right? Change the way that you live from daily tiny habits, right? And perhaps thinking about death differently, or reading about death from different perspectives, right? Maybe to be a little less fearful. What would that mean? How would you engage? How would you encounter other people? How would you relate to other people? How would you relate to the planet if you knew it was continuing, that you're fertilizer for it? Make sense? Too much? Okay. Did we compare? We didn't even compare. Last comparison. Sorry, I know it's been a long class. We did not do a comp. There was a comp in the end. Do you want to skip it? Do you want to talk about philosophy, or do you want to look at the image? The image was of Hatshepsut. What are we? All right, let's quickly and other previous, the Menkaure king, as well as one other sculpture. So talk to me about the philosophy, or talk to me about this.
She's her stance, her pose
Sorry.
is. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tess, I can hear you now.
Okay. Her pose is I don't know the right word, but more giving to the gods instead of becoming a god. Or
Right.
her position as a god. I'm not sure.
Yes.
This stone, it's just it's not smooth. I mean, it's not like shiny and polished the way that the others are. I mean, it's smooth and polished.
Right.
It's
So she did have this kind of offering. It was made in granite. It's incredibly solid. But know that after 20 years of her reign, there was another, after she died, there was another pharaoh that actually toppled these sculptures. That's why you see so many cracks. And we actually don't know if these pieces actually fit from one to the other. So we don't know if each piece is exactly where it's supposed to be, but they were found broken. And there were many. This one was, the 8 of them or so are kneeling. There's some of them that she's standing, and there's some of them that are at Sphinx. But you're right. There's the standing one of the Menkaure and his queen is the stereotypical form of the Egyptian rule, right? You have these powerful figures standing upright, being vertical, right? And this is one of the first, actually the first sort of sitting down, unless you count the Sphinx, sitting down position. And certainly it is one of offering. It's one of sort of giving. She actually has 2 bowls of offering in her hands to give to as the god passes, the sculpture of the god passes through this temple, which we know they did once a year for a festival. You have her offering up to the god, and then embodying the god herself. Any other thoughts about either philosophy or this comparison? And I'm sorry, the last one's cut off, but it's the death mask again.
I had a question.
Yeah.
If for the Egyptians and their beliefs, if you take the death mask and you take the sarcophagus, would that interrupt their afterlife?
That's a really great question. In their philosophy, absolutely. Of course it would. They put those objects in there because they expected it to be there for eternity, right? Their existence after death is eternal. When you rob the grave, as all of these are out of context, right? Think about the Menkaure and the queen. They were stepping out of their temple. They were stepping out. You have to imagine these things in their rightful setting. These guys are stepping out of the temple. This one is a procession in front of her temple. And obviously the death mask is on the mummy itself. When we take them out of our context and only look at them as symbols of art, the whole thing collapses. It's not a piece of art. It represents so much more, right? So yeah, I don't think they'd be very happy that we have basically robbed their graves, right? Yeah, I think it's super fascinating, right? And the dichotomy that we are experiencing. Now museums are starting to question these things. We haven't for hundreds and hundreds of years. We thought it was fine to pillage and steal. We're continuing with the Columbus strand of these things are for us, and we are here to take them, right? Now things are shifting, as rightfully they should, and they should have shifted a long time ago. But we are reconsidering what the museum is, what it offers, and the wrongs that the museums have done, right? The pillage and taking. Yes, they may have paid the cultures, perhaps some, but they're also making income, folks. It's really, and yes, you can think about them as they're artifacts for everybody on the planet, and that's interesting in terms of education. But do we have to do it at the expense of taking Tutankhamun's not only sarcophagus, we took his body, we took the mummy. I mean, we, you know, like we pulled it out, we yanked it out, we've disrupted his eternal life, and shame on us. Because, yeah, if he's a god, we are in trouble. Right? I mean, in terms of philosophy. It's I laugh, but of course these things have serious consequences depending on what you believe in.
There was this kind of like a meme type thing. Not that any of this is a meme, but where it was talking about how they had just, I believe it was King Tut's grave that they had just like desecrated essentially, and it there was writing that said that he would curse whoever it was that were to desecrate his grave, and then all of a sudden 2020 hit. And it's just kind of like
no, there's, I mean, there's, you know, these, in terms of how Egyptians or people who think about objects in a different way, understanding the power of objects, and that there might be other, just by arranging the particles differently, right? Like you're sculpting something, it's a rock, and suddenly it becomes a pharaoh. You're doing an alchemic transformation to the material. And we understand that to a point, but in the West, we treat it very, very differently. It's completely different and for different purpose, different use. And it's interesting. The memes are almost like hieroglyphs of today, right? Like that's how we converse. Digitally, there's a potential of having everything digital, and therefore not needing the object or hold on to the artifact, right? We think about holding on to objects or filling our houses with clutter. Do we need to? Can you photograph that thing and let it go? Right? Just a possibility. Different way of living. You don't, do you need, Brianna, you're looking puzzled. Sorry.
No, sorry, I'm at work. I got distracted.
All right. And those of you who are working like mad, I've heard from some students, just be careful about this multitasking thing, right? The highest form of intelligence is when you can focus on what's on your reality at the moment, right? And that deserves great, great attention, because that's the only life you have at the moment, okay? So just make sure that those moments are filled with exactly what you want to do. All right. End of preaching in class. There will be a quiz at the end of the week about the Egyptians, so go through those slides. We will tackle the next, I think Aegeans are coming up next on Thursday, and then your quiz is actually, I'm just going to let you know, it's focused on the Egyptian section. So just make sure that you go over what we looked at today. And that's it from my end, unless you guys want to stick around for philosophy. But other than that, I'm happy to see you on Thursday.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I was like a few minutes late, and when I came in, you guys were talking about pushing something from Friday to Saturday. Could I ask what that was? I'm sorry.
That's fine. That was the quiz. I think most people voted to have the quiz just like it was before on a Saturday rather than Friday, just to give you a little bit more time.
On the 25th still.
Yes. Does that work for you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. It will be done.
Make sure I didn't miss anything.
Bye, bye guys.
Thank you.
Is there
Yeah.
Is there a time frame for that quiz? Just because I work until like 5:30.
I think you have to the end of the day, but you can also take it. It's a 20-minute quiz that you're timed for those 20 minutes. It's basically 3 questions. I don't know why the timing is necessary, but you get 1 or 2 tries of doing the quiz, and it ends after 20 minutes. So whether you do it in the morning or whether you do it at night, or if you want to do it, it's going to be open and you can do it on Friday if you want to.
Okay.
You can do it now. If you go through the Egyptian slides and you're prepared for it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah, Carla, go for it.
I've been trying to email you. I'm not sure what's going on, but I can't access the recordings. It's asking for a passcode. I've tried the passcode and it's not letting me in. It's only for the 10th and the 15th, I believe, not the 17th. Well, I was there for the 17th.
Okay, so you're looking for the recording from the 15th?
Well, you've posted the links.
Yes. They should all be there.
Because it's asking for a passcode.
So you should, being enrolled in the class, you should automatically have access to those. I'm going to talk to the dean today, and to the chair of the arts, and make sure that the Zoom is supposed to, I put it in 2 places, both in announcements and neither one of those is working for you?
Nope, and I've tried it on my phone, I've tried it on my iPad and
Okay.
computer.
You're not the only one that's having problems, so I'm going to look into it, and if I need to, I'll just copy it onto YouTube, make it public, and you'll have it from there, and I'll send you the link, okay? And I'll
However, you
get
did the 17th, that worked. So I don't know if you posted it differently.
They're all recorded in the same way. It's so weird. I don't know why Zoom, I don't know what part of the technology is flaking out. I really don't know the background behind it, but they're all, it's the same class, it's the same cloud recording, and it should be giving you the same access. There's no like public or privacy laws that are turned on and off. They're the same. So I'm going to, yeah. Thank you. I'm so very, very sorry. I'll try to get it to you as soon as I can.
No worries.
But it won't, the 15th is not going to affect your quiz for this week. It's today's class and today's slides that will be relevant for the quiz on the end of the week. Okay?
Thank you.
Pleasure. Be good.
I just have a question. You were saying something about like to say that we were like our attendants to email you after class.
Yes.
Is that what you want? So
Nicole, if you miss or if you happen to not be in class for whatever reason, just email me that you watched the recording, and I'll make sure that it works. And then I give you attendance for that day. So if you've missed any attendances so far, just let me know as soon as you've done watching it, just send me a quick email. I watched a video, and I'll pump your, I'll get your credit for your attendance. Okay?
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Hannah?
Yeah.
Are you still there?
Yeah, I was just told that there would be philosophy.
Yeah. Well, as you can see, most people are not interested in that part. No, I think it's super critical that you guys know that there's no one really to sort of guide, that you own it, right? You own the education. It's up to you to get what you need out of it. Because I think so many, at least in other, Salem State is a little bit different, but I see, it's so strange. The kids that pay more for school are less engaged than the ones that have lower. It blows my mind that these kids are spending $200,000 for their education, and it's not something that they want to be doing. It's so strange. Yeah.